Hello! Today I'm continuing my look at the Tekken series with a discussion on martial and forest law, who along with the Mishimas, the Williams, the Changs, and so on, comprise one of the many legacy families and clans featured throughout the Tekken series since the very first game. Now, Law Senior and Son are an interesting pair of characters that were among the first and the most obvious in the series roster to nod towards existent pop culture and pay homage to historic icons that paved the way for martial arts inspired media, and in this instance in the form of Bruce Lee. And this appropriation of a famous fighting actor isn't unique to Tekken, nor is it even the first instance of such a thing to happen, since 1992's Mortal Kombat was supposed to have Jean-Claude Van Damme as the main character, which, after he signed on for the Street Fighter movie, was cancelled and later adapted into the closely analogous Johnny Cage. But turning to the characters of Law, the premise of Tekken being a series of realistic-looking fighters with realistic, plausible fighting styles, and the fact it was released on the PlayStation system, which permitted much more advanced movement and graphics, the homage to Bruce Lee was much more palpable. And so, from the outset of Tekken 1, with his sound effects, his moveset, and even the colour palette of his Player 1 and Player 2 costumes seeming to echo Bruce Lee's performances in Enter the Dragon and Game of Death, respectively, these all attest to the tribute that the martial law character makes to Bruce Lee and his brief but iconic roles and contribution to Hong Kong cinema. And this aesthetic correlation only increases as time wears on, with Tekken 2 moving away from the generic standing stances and introducing the more reactive Bruce Lee style and an augmented moveset to match that, and Tekken 3 with Forest Law's introduction again paying homage to Game of Death with the Player 3 outfit, though it is fair to say, with Forrest's introduction, they moved away from overtly Bruce Lee sort of attires, and the costumes such as the chef's outfit and his role as a restaurateur, being a much more general nod towards Hong Kong cinema and kung fu movie themes in general, which often depict immigrating Chinese families adapting to hostile foreign lands as they try and run their small businesses. And Bruce Lee's Way of the Dragon is a great example of that, and one of his best films, I think. We have Jackie Chan's Mr. Nice Guy and Sammo Hung's aptly titled Kung Fu Chef being just such examples. So the Bruce Lee connotations around Law are clear for all to see. They are enduringly popular, and I think a fitting homage to a great cultural icon that has persisted, albeit in a diluted way over the years, through the characters of martial law and forest law. Moving into story, again following in the footsteps of Bruce Lee, martial law is an American but closely bound to his Chinese heritage, and Tekken 1 sees him intent on winning fame and fortune in an effort to open his own dojo. And in this instance he fails to do so, as he fought Wang Jinri to a standstill in Tekken 1. And it was Yoshimitsu's canonical ending and theft of Ganryu's sumo winnings, which he dispersed among Law's ailing neighbourhood, that actually allowed martial law to achieve his dojo, and this opened the door to the story of Tekken 2. Now, arriving into Tekken 2, Law is one of the few characters to actually have his sub-boss switched up, since Wang was exchanged in favour of the aggressive Taekwondo practitioner, Baek, and between Baek and Law, very much like Forrest and Hwoarang that followed in Tekken 3, these two characters boasted the best of Tekken 2's improvements in the movesets and the sort of kicking manoeuvres that they had. And story-wise, Law entered the tournament specifically to seek out Baek Dusan, because this guy had smashed up his dojo, attacked a few of his students. And so it's just another one of these small scenarios and microcosms of story that saw reason to perpetuate Law's character and introduce new characters into the main Tekken roster. Beyond this, and perhaps more importantly, Tekken 2 was important for the Law canon because it establishes the blossoming friendship between Paul Phoenix and the Law family. And it's the first inkling of humour being derived from these two characters and their interpersonal relationships. And I know in the past I have bemoaned Paul becoming a joke character, but I think his friendship with Law is actually a high point of the game's character associations, and it's more his wanting to fight aliens in Tekken 5, for example, that I find more bothersome about his character arc. And in the instance of Tekken 2, for example, seeing Paul attempt the somersault kick and fail was actually a pretty amusing ending, and I loved that they doubled down on this for Forrest Law's Tekken 3 ending, where both Marshall and Paul attempt to imitate Forrest Law's kip-up move, and they fail to do so, owing to their advancing middle age. Now, unlike Hwoarang, Julia Chang, or other young successors to their masters or family members, Forrest Law only makes a handful of appearances and cameos in the Tekken saga, and Tekken 3 is his main inclusion to the series. And it's actually his long-suffering father Marshall who features in most of the tournaments, usually because his son has racked up massive debts or caused some sort of problem or damage. And so he's increasingly assumed this humorous cycle of being broke and needing cash through most of the in-game narrative. And I think this is pretty well executed through his hilarious cutscenes and canon and non-canon interactions with Paul Phoenix across the mainline series and the Tekken tag games. And so, while distance increasingly from the severity with which Bruce Lee tended to conduct himself in his films, and going down a route more akin to the goofiness and the bombast of Jackie Chan films, for example, I think Law remains an excellent, albeit hapless, aging fighter, and there's a brilliant juxtaposition between his unsurpassable martial arts skills and his negligible acumen as a businessman, and this perpetual brokenness that he always finds himself in. And finally, as a Paul Phoenix fan and a Bruce Lee fan, I do enjoy seeing Martial Law's continued inclusion and the interactions between these two characters, goofy though they are. And while I do hope Paul regains some of his earlier severity and legitimacy, I do hope that he continues in this thread of story with Martial Law and the fostering of this often ridiculous friendship that they tend to have. So in all, I think Martial Law is a fantastic character. His moveset is unique and again really faithfully draws on the cinematic heritage of Bruce Lee, with his fast reactive fighting style, excellent kick maneuvers and punching combos. So there we have it, some brief thoughts on the character of Law, who is an excellent legacy inclusion to the Tekken series, and certainly among my favourites to continue featuring through the game. If you got this far, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. And drop a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on the characters of Law.